Nobody was ready for what happened next. The ball had already cleared the fence. The crowd was already on its feet. The Dodger Stadium scoreboard was already lighting up. And Shohei Ohtani, calm as ever, had already begun his home run trot, that steady, unhurried pace he carries around the bases as if he has done this 10,000 times and fully expects to do it 10,000 more. And then something happened that nobody in that stadium, nobody watching on television, and nobody scrolling through highlight reels had seen coming. For Washington Nationals players broke from their positions and moved toward Ohtani. Not away from him. Toward him. The cameras caught it. The commentators went quiet for a half second, that rare, unscripted silence that happens when something genuinely unexpected unfolds on a baseball field. Fans in the stands turned to each other with confused expressions. Social media, which had already been celebrating the home run itself, suddenly shifted its entire focus to one question. What are they doing? Why are 4 opposing players surrounding Ohtani? And then the Nationals manager, watching from the dugout steps, did something that nobody expected either. He wiped his eyes. In over 30 years of professional baseball, as a player, as a coach, as a manager, he had seen thousands of home runs. He had seen celebrations, arguments, dramatic moments of every kind. But standing on those dugout steps, watching what was unfolding between his 4 players and the greatest player in the world, something broke through his professional composure and reached the man underneath. Today, we are going to tell you exactly what happened in that moment. But to understand why it hit that hard, why 4 opposing players did what they did, why a veteran manager was moved to tears, and why Ohtani's reaction to all of it became the most talked about moment of the early 2025 season, you have to understand something deeper first. You have to understand what kind of man Shohei Ohtani actually is. In the immediate aftermath of a home run, there is a choreography that baseball follows almost automatically. The pitcher turns away or steps off the mound. The fielders reset. The crowd celebrates or groans depending on their allegiance. The batter rounds the bases. Everyone stays in their lane. That is the unwritten code of the game. Which is exactly why what the Nationals players did was so striking. As Ohtani rounded first base, one Nationals player, standing near the baseline, did not step back. He stepped forward. He said something directly to Ohtani. Then, by the time Ohtani reached second base, 2 more Nationals players had drifted closer than the situation required. And as he came around third, a 4th player was watching with an expression that had nothing to do with the competitive tension of a regular season game. From a distance, it looked confrontational. The camera angles in the first few seconds made it easy to misread. Social media ran with the most dramatic interpretation immediately, headlines formed before the full story was known, as they always do now. But the full story was the opposite of confrontational. What those 4 Nationals players were doing was something baseball almost never allows. They were crossing the invisible line between competition and admiration, openly, in the middle of a game, because what they were witnessing was simply too significant to pretend otherwise. They were not surrounding Ohtani. They were paying their respects. Here is what the quick headlines missed entirely. 3 of the 4 Nationals players who approached Ohtani that day had a history with him that went far deeper than opposing teams sharing a field. 2 of them had been present at the same MLB All-Star events where Ohtani's presence in the clubhouse had left a lasting impression on players across the league. The 3rd had crossed paths with Ohtani during international competition earlier in his career, a period that players who experienced it consistently describe as transformative. But the 4th player's connection was the most significant of all. This was a player who had spoken publicly, in a low-profile interview that never gained much traction outside of hardcore baseball circles, about a moment during a previous season when he had been going through one of the most difficult stretches of his professional career. A prolonged slump, mounting pressure, the kind of internal spiral that athletes rarely admit to publicly but that nearly every professional player experiences at some point. During that period, he had been in the same stadium as Ohtani before a game. Not teammates. Not even close acquaintances at that point. Just two professional players existing in the same space before competition began. Ohtani had noticed something was off. Without being asked. Without any mutual connection prompting the conversation. He had simply walked over, sat down nearby, and talked, not about baseball, but about the kind of ordinary human things that remind a struggling person that they are more than their current performance. It lasted maybe 10 minutes. Ohtani moved on with his preparation. The other player went on with his day. But the player never forgot it. He said later that what struck him was not any specific advice Ohtani gave. It was the fact that Ohtani gave anything at all. That a player of his stature, already one of the most famous athletes on the planet at that point, would notice a struggling player from a different team, in a casual pre-game environment, and choose to spend 10 minutes of his valuable preparation time offering simple human connection. That is the Ohtani that the four Nationals players knew. Not the highlight reel. Not the statistics. The person. And when that person hit his first home run of the 2025 season in front of them, they could not simply stand at their positions and pretend it was just another at-bat. By the time the full account of the exchange emerged, pieced together from multiple sources, post-game comments, and footage that captured partial audio, the picture that formed was remarkable in its simplicity. There were no grand speeches. No dramatic declarations. The language of baseball players in emotional moments tends toward the direct and uncomplicated. The first player, near first base, said something that translated roughly to, "That's what we've been waiting for. Welcome back." Two words in that sentence carry enormous weight. Welcome back. Not to the Dodgers. Not to the stadium. But back to this, to the version of Ohtani that the baseball world had been holding its breath to see again. The acknowledgement from an opposing player that Ohtani's return to home run production mattered beyond team allegiances. The exchange at second base was briefer, a gesture more than words, one player simply raising his chin toward Ohtani in a quiet acknowledgement that communicated respect without requiring language. The moment near third base lingered slightly longer. The player who had that personal history with Ohtani, the 10-minute conversation that he never forgot, looked at him directly and said, simply, "You deserve this." 3 words. But from that particular player, in that particular context, carrying the full weight of everything that had passed between them and everything Ohtani had invested in the years leading to that moment. Ohtani's response to all of it was entirely consistent with who he is. He did not stop. He did not linger. He did not perform. He acknowledged each player with a brief nod, genuine, unhurried, present, and continued his trot. Not dismissing the moments. Not inflating them. Simply receiving them with the same quiet dignity he brings to everything. The Nationals manager has been in professional baseball for over 3 decades. He is not a man given to visible emotion on the field. Those who have worked under him describe a person of steady composure, demanding, intelligent, deeply experienced, not easily moved by the surface drama of individual games. Which is exactly why those watching from the dugout were caught off guard when they saw his expression change. He explained it afterward, in the kind of honest, unguarded post-game comment that reporters rarely receive and almost never expect. He said he was not crying about the home run. He was not even crying specifically about his player's gesture, as meaningful as it was. He was crying because of Ohtani's response. Because in that brief trot around the bases, receiving genuine admiration from 4 opposing players, each acknowledgement landed and returned with quiet grace, he saw something that his years in the game had taught him was genuinely rare. He saw a player who was completely at peace with who he was. Not performing confidence. Not managing an image. Not calculating how the moment would look. Simply a man moving through a significant moment with an ease and wholeness that only comes from years of doing the internal work, the character work, the values work, the work that happens in private long before any public moment arrives. The manager had spent his career trying to develop that quality in players. He had seen glimpses of it in exceptional individuals over the years. But he had rarely seen it expressed so completely and so naturally as he saw it in those 30 seconds of Ohtani rounding the bases. He said, "I've managed a long time. You see a lot. But every once in a while you see something and you think, that's what it's supposed to look like. That's the whole thing right there." He paused before adding, "I wasn't embarrassed to feel that." Within hours of the game ending, the clip had traveled far beyond the usual baseball audience. Sports media covered it. But then lifestyle media picked it up. Then general news outlets. Then the kind of accounts on social platforms that exist specifically to share moments of unexpected human warmth, accounts with audiences of millions who could not name a single player's batting average but who watched that clip multiple times and shared it without hesitation. The comments on those posts were telling. Baseball fans discussed the significance within the sport. But the larger audience responded to something else entirely. They responded to the image of four men crossing a competitive boundary to honor someone they respected. They responded to one man's tears on a dugout step. They responded to Ohtani's quiet, unperformed acknowledgement of it all. The most repeated comment, across platforms and languages, was some variation of the same sentiment. This is what sports is actually for. Not the statistics. Not the contracts. Not the records and the rankings and the endless analytical debate. But the moments when the game strips everything back and reveals the human beings underneath, and occasionally, very occasionally, those human beings turn out to be genuinely extraordinary not just at the game but at the larger, harder project of being a person. Ohtani has built a career full of those moments. And somehow, each new one lands with the same force as the first. With his first home run now behind him, and with the story of what followed it now part of the season's early narrative, it is worth stepping back and asking what all of this tells us about where Ohtani and this season are headed. The baseball answer is straightforward. A player of Ohtani's caliber, who showed historic production in 2024 and whose preparation and physical condition remain at the highest level, was always going to produce once the season found its rhythm. The first home run was a formality delayed, not a crisis resolved. But the deeper answer is more interesting. What the moment with the Nationals players revealed is that Ohtani's standing in the game has evolved beyond competition. He is no longer simply a player that other players respect because of what he can do. He is a player that other players have genuine affection for because of who he is. That distinction matters more than it might initially seem. Players who are feared are managed around. Players who are genuinely admired are played against differently, with a competitive intensity that carries an undercurrent of appreciation, a desire to compete against the best version of them rather than simply to neutralize them. Ohtani brings out something in opposing players that very few athletes ever achieve. He makes people want to see him succeed even as they compete against him. And that quality, that rare ability to inspire without diminishing, to be great without making others feel small, is perhaps his most extraordinary attribute of all. For players crossed a line they were not required to cross. One manager felt something he was not embarrassed to show. And the man at the center of it all rounded the bases with the same quiet, grateful composure he brings to every moment, large or small, celebrated or unnoticed. The home run will go in the record books. The statistics will be updated. The season will continue forward with all its games and at-bats and moments yet to unfold. But what happened on those base paths, that brief, unscripted, entirely genuine sequence of human connection in the middle of a competitive baseball game, is the kind of moment that stays with people long after the numbers fade. Not because it was dramatic. Not because it was unprecedented. But because it was real. And in the middle of all the noise that surrounds Shohei Ohtani, the analysis, the debate, the relentless measuring of what he has done and what he might do next, a real moment is the most powerful thing there is. The opposing manager understood that completely. Standing on those dugout steps, making no effort to hide what he was feeling, he was not reacting to a baseball play. He was reacting to a human being at his very best. And so were the rest of us.